What happens when a man who cannot see discovers he's been blind in more ways than one? Dan Whitmore, a billionaire who lost his sight but never his faith, is about to uncover a truth that will shatter everything he believed about love. His fiancée Gloria has been living a lie, but it's Mary, the woman with the healing voice, who will teach him that true sight comes from the heart. In a world obsessed with appearances, can love survive when it's built on honesty instead of deception? This is a story of betrayal, redemption, and a love that sees beyond the surface. If you're ready for a journey that will move your soul, stay until the end. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart. Gloria's laughter echoed through the marble halls of the Whitmore mansion. Dan sat alone in his study, fingers tracing the embossed leather of a book he could no longer read, listening to the sounds of his own engagement party filtering through the closed door. He'd excused himself 20 minutes ago, claiming a headache, but the truth was simpler and more devastating. He needed to breathe away from Gloria's suffocating perfume and performative affection. He heard her heels clicking down the hallway, sharp and purposeful, followed by the unmistakable sound of his study door opening and closing. She didn't know he was there, tucked in the corner by the window where the evening breeze offered some relief. "God, finally," Gloria muttered, her voice stripped of the honey sweetness she used in public. Her phone rang, and she answered immediately. "Baby, I thought you'd never call." Dan's fingers stilled on the book's spine. "Baby." She'd never called him that. "No, he's upstairs with his headache," Gloria continued, her voice dripping with contempt. "Or whatever excuse he's using tonight. Honestly, Marcus, you should see how easy this is. He doesn't even know when I leave the room. I tell him I'm right beside him, and he actually believes it. Sometimes I just sit there on my phone while he talks about his feelings or whatever blind people obsess over." The book slipped from Dan's hands, landing on the Persian rug with a muffled thud. Gloria didn't hear it. She was laughing now, cruel and bright. "The wedding? 3 months. Then I wait a respectable year, maybe 18 months, play the devoted wife, and when I file for divorce, I'll have enough to never work again." His lawyers made sure the prenup expires after a year. Can you believe it? He actually trusts me that much. Dan's chest constricted. He wanted to move, to speak, to do something, but his body had turned to stone. Every word was a surgical cut, precise and deep. "Does he suspect anything?" Marcus's voice was barely audible through the phone, but Gloria's response rang clear. "Marcus, the man is blind. Literally blind. He can't see me roll my eyes when he talks about his precious foundation or his boring charity work. He can't see me texting you during dinner. He can't see anything, and that's exactly why this works. I almost feel bad for him, but then I remember the 7-figure checking account and the house in Aspen, and I feel much better." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Dan had ever experienced. It pressed against his eardrums like water pressure at the bottom of a deep ocean. "I have to go back before someone misses me," Gloria said, her voice returning to its public sweetness like an actor putting on a mask. "Love you, baby. Soon this will all be ours." The door opened and closed. Her heels clicked away, growing fainter with each step. Dan sat in the darkness he'd lived in for 3 years, since the accident that stole his sight but supposedly left everything else intact. He'd told himself he was lucky. He had his health, his wealth, his mind. He had Gloria, beautiful Gloria who'd stuck by him through the rehabilitation and the depression and the slow, painful acceptance of his new reality. But that had been a lie. All of it. A performance for an audience of one, a blind man who couldn't see the contempt in her eyes or the betrayal in her smile. He sat there until his breathing steadied, until the rage and humiliation crystallized into something harder and colder. Then he pulled out his phone, the one with the accessibility features that let him navigate the digital world through sound and touch, and called the one person he knew would tell him the truth. "Philip," Dan said when his assistant answered. "I need you to come to the house. Now. And don't let Gloria see you." 20 minutes later, Philip Crane stood in the study, his presence a familiar comfort of expensive cologne and quiet loyalty. "What happened?" Philip asked, his voice tight with concern. Dan told him everything, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. When he finished, the silence stretched between them like a taut wire. "I'll kill her," Philip said flatly. "I mean that literally. I will drive her into the Gulf of Mexico." Despite everything, Dan almost smiled. "No, you won't." "Then what do you want me to do?" "Name it." "Anything." Dan leaned back in his chair, his sightless eyes fixed on where he knew Philip was standing. "I want you to investigate her. Quietly. Everything. Bank accounts, phone records, this Marcus person, all of it. I want documentation." "Already on it," Philip said. "I've been documenting her suspicious behavior for 6 months. I knew something was wrong. I just couldn't prove it." 6 months. Dan's voice cracked slightly. "You were happy. Or I thought you were. I didn't want to be wrong and cause you pain for nothing." Dan nodded slowly. He had been happy, or at least he'd convinced himself he was. It was easier than facing the alternative, that he'd traded his self-respect for the illusion of normalcy, for the desperate need to prove that losing his sight hadn't made him less worthy of love. "There's something else," Philip said carefully. "Someone else you should talk to." "Who?" "Mary Johnson." The name landed softly, but it carried weight. Mary, Gloria's friend who'd been coming to the house 3 times a week for the past 2 months for music therapy sessions. Mary with the warm voice and patient hands who'd taught him to experience music not as sound but as color and texture and emotion. "What about her?" Dan asked, though something in his chest already knew the answer. "She asked me last week if you seemed happy. Not content, not fine, happy. She said she was worried about you." Philip paused. "No one who really cares about Gloria would worry about you like that. And Gloria's been treating her terribly lately. I've heard them arguing." Dan remembered the sessions with Mary, the way time seemed to slow down when she played piano, how her voice painted pictures he could almost see. He remembered the warmth of her hand when she'd guided his fingers across the keys, teaching him to feel the music in his bones. He remembered thinking, just last week, that he couldn't wait for their next session, and then feeling guilty for that excitement. "Set up a meeting with her," Dan said quietly. "Tomorrow. Somewhere private." "And Philip?" "Yes?" "Don't tell Gloria I'm ending the engagement." "Not yet. I want all the documentation first. When I do this, I want it to be surgical." Philip's hand gripped Dan's shoulder, firm and reassuring. "She never deserved you, Dan. Not for a single second." After Philip left, Dan sat alone with his thoughts. The party had ended, the house fallen quiet. He heard Gloria's heels on the stairs, approaching their bedroom. He heard her humming something cheerful, probably thinking about Marcus and her plans and the future she'd stolen from both of them. He didn't move from the study. He couldn't share a bed with her tonight, couldn't pretend everything was normal when his entire world had just revealed itself to be a carefully constructed fraud. Instead, he pulled out his phone and, after a long moment of hesitation, sent a text message using voice-to-text. "Mary, this is Dan. Can we talk tomorrow? Not about music. About something important. Please." The response came 3 minutes later, her message read aloud by his phone's accessibility features, of course. "Anytime. Is everything okay?" He typed back, "No. But it will be." The next afternoon, Dan met Mary at a quiet coffee shop on the east side of Austin, far from the society circles where Gloria held court. Philip had arranged everything, including a corner table away from other patrons. Mary's presence announced itself before she spoke, the rustle of fabric, the soft scent of jasmine, the particular rhythm of her breathing that he'd learned to recognize during their sessions. "Dan," she said softly, sliding into the chair across from him. "You look tired." "I didn't sleep much." He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup Philip had ordered for him, needing something to anchor him. "Thank you for coming." "What's wrong?" Philip said it was urgent. Dan had prepared a speech, a careful explanation, but sitting across from Mary, he found he couldn't maintain the pretense. Gloria's been having an affair. Planning to divorce me after a year of marriage to bypass the prenup. She thinks I'm too blind to notice or care. He heard Mary's sharp intake of breath, then the sound of her hand covering her mouth. Oh God, Dan. I'm so sorry. Her voice broke. I knew something was wrong. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that I was being paranoid or jealous or... Jealous? Dan interrupted gently. Silence. Then, barely audible, yes. The confession hung between them, fragile and honest. Dan felt something shift in his chest, like a door opening in a house he'd thought had no exits. How long have you known about her? Dan asked. Mary's voice trembled. I suspected for a few weeks. She'd make these comments, these little cruel observations about you when you weren't around. At first, I thought I was misunderstanding, that maybe she was just stressed about the wedding. But then last week, I saw her texting someone during one of our sessions. She was sitting right there in the corner while you played piano, and she was texting heart emojis to someone named M in her phone. Marcus, Dan supplied. You know his name. I heard her talking to him last night. At our engagement party. Dan's fingers tightened on the coffee cup. She doesn't know I heard. She thinks I'm too blind to realize when I'm being betrayed. Dan. The worst part, he continued, his voice steady despite the emotion underneath, isn't the affair or the money or even the lies. It's that I convinced myself I was lucky to have her. That losing my sight meant I should be grateful for whatever scraps of affection came my way. That I didn't deserve better because I couldn't see. Stop. Mary's hand covered his, warm and solid. Stop right there. Your blindness doesn't make you less worthy of love. It doesn't make you less anything. Gloria's betrayal says everything about her and nothing about you. Dan turned his hand over, lacing his fingers with hers. It felt natural, inevitable, like a conversation they'd been having without words for weeks. When did you know, he asked quietly, that I had feelings for you? Mary laughed softly, sadly. The third session. You were playing piano, and you got frustrated because you couldn't remember the sequence. You said, I can't see the keys, I can't remember the pattern, what's the point? And I told you to stop trying to see and start trying to feel. Do you remember what happened next? I played it perfectly. You played it beautifully. And when you finished, you turned to where I was sitting and you smiled, this real, genuine smile, and you said, Mary, you make me feel like I can see colors again. I knew then that I was in trouble. Dan's throat tightened. Why didn't you say anything? Because you were engaged to my best friend. Because I thought maybe I was projecting my own loneliness onto you. Because I was terrified that what I felt was one-sided, that you saw me as just a therapist or a friend. She paused. And because Gloria told me explicitly to stay away from you emotionally. She said you were fragile, that you got attached too easily, that I shouldn't encourage any dependence. She was isolating me. The realization came slowly, puzzle pieces clicking into place. Making sure I didn't form connections with anyone who might actually care about me. I think so. And I let her. God, Dan, I should have said something. I should have warned you. You're saying something now. Dan squeezed her hand. That's what matters. They sat in silence for a long moment, the coffee shop humming with distant conversations and the hiss of the espresso machine. Dan felt something he hadn't experienced in years, clarity. Not visual clarity, but emotional certainty, the kind that came from finally seeing people as they truly were rather than as he wished them to be. What are you going to do? Mary asked finally. End the engagement. Publicly. Philip's gathering evidence of the affair. When I'm done, she won't get a cent beyond what she came into this relationship with. She'll fight back. She'll make it ugly. Let her try. Dan's voice hardened. I spent 3 years thinking I was damaged goods, that I should be grateful for whatever love I could get. I'm done with that. I'm done with her. Mary was quiet for a beat. What about us? The question settled over them, heavy with possibility and risk. Dan turned toward her, his sightless eyes not quite meeting hers but close enough that she could feel the intensity of his attention. I don't know, he admitted. I don't want you to be a rebound or a reaction to Gloria. I don't want to hurt you. But Mary, when I'm with you, I feel like myself again. The person I was before the accident, before Gloria, before I convinced myself that being blind meant being less than. You remind me that I can still experience beauty, still create it, still deserve it. You do deserve it, Mary whispered fiercely. You deserve everything. Then help me believe that. Not today, not while this is fresh and messy. But after I've dealt with Gloria and healed and figured out who I am on my own, would you be willing to try? To see if what we feel is real. Mary's hand tightened on his. I'll be here. However long it takes. The confrontation with Gloria happened 3 days later. Philip had worked quickly, gathering phone records, financial statements, surveillance footage of Gloria meeting Marcus at hotels across the city. The evidence was damning and comprehensive. Dan arranged to meet Gloria in the library, the room where they'd first discussed marriage, where she'd cried and told him that his blindness didn't matter, that she loved him exactly as he was. He wondered now if she'd been practicing her lines even then. You wanted to talk. Gloria breezed into the room, her perfume announcing her presence. I have lunch with the wedding planner in an hour, so make it quick. Cancel it, Dan said calmly. There won't be a wedding. The silence that followed was profound. Dan heard her inhale sharply, heard the rustle of fabric as she moved closer. What are you talking about? Her voice had an edge now, the sweetness cracking. I'm talking about Marcus. I'm talking about your plan to divorce me after a year. I'm talking about every lie you've told me since the accident. Dan's voice remained steady, each word precise. I heard you, Gloria. On the phone. At our engagement party. You thought I was upstairs, but I was in my study. I heard every word. The room went deathly still. Dan could practically hear Gloria's mind racing, calculating, trying to find the right angle. Dan, whatever you think you heard. I heard you call me easy to manipulate because I'm blind. I heard you laugh about how I don't know when you leave the room. I heard you tell Marcus that you're counting down the days until you can divorce me and take half of everything I've built. He pulled an envelope from his pocket and held it out. Philip has documented everything. The affair, the financial planning, all of it. You have 2 choices, walk away now with nothing but what you brought into this relationship, or fight me and have every detail of your betrayal become public record. Gloria snatched the envelope, and Dan heard papers rustling as she read through the evidence. The silence stretched, broken only by her ragged breathing. You bastard, she finally hissed. You had me followed? You had me investigated. You had me fooled, Dan countered. I think investigation is fair play. This is about Mary, isn't it? Gloria's voice turned venomous. Poor little Mary with her sad eyes and her pathetic music therapy. Did she tell you? Did she run to you with her concerns about me? God, I knew I shouldn't have brought her around you. I knew she'd develop some kind of savior complex. Mary has nothing to do with my decision to end our engagement. That's entirely on you and your choices. Please. Gloria laughed, sharp and bitter. You're in love with her. I've seen the way you light up during those ridiculous sessions. The way you ask about her between appointments. Don't pretend this is about principle, Dan. You're just trading one woman for another. If I am in love with Mary, Dan said quietly, it's because she showed me what actual kindness looks like. What honesty feels like. She didn't treat my blindness like a character flaw or an opportunity for exploitation. She treated me like a human being. How noble. Gloria's voice dripped with sarcasm. The blind billionaire and his music therapist. It's very Hallmark movie. I'm sure you'll be very happy in your little fantasy world where love conquers all and physical disability doesn't matter. My blindness doesn't define me, Gloria. It never did. But your cruelty defines you. Dan stood, using his cane to navigate around the desk. You have until the end of the week to move out. Philip will handle the logistics. Don't contact me again unless it's through lawyers. You'll regret this, Gloria spat. I'll tell everyone you're unstable, that you're having a breakdown. I'll ruin you. Try. Dan's voice was steel wrapped in silk. But remember, I have evidence. You have excuses. Choose wisely. He walked out of the library, leaving Gloria alone with her fury and her failed plans. Philip was waiting in the hallway, and together they walked to Dan's study, where they could hear Gloria's screams of frustration echoing through the house. That went well, Philip observed dryly. Despite everything, Dan smiled. It really did. The next 2 weeks were chaos. Gloria tried to spin the story, telling anyone who would listen that Dan was mentally unstable, that his blindness had made him paranoid and delusional. But Philip had already shared the evidence with key members of Austin society, and public opinion turned swiftly against her. The affair became tabloid fodder. Marcus dumped her to avoid the scandal, and Gloria found herself persona non grata in the circles she'd worked so hard to infiltrate. Dan stayed out of the spotlight, focusing on his foundation and his healing. He saw Mary twice during that time, once to tell her everything that had happened, and once to ask if she'd be willing to continue their music therapy sessions. Not as therapy, he clarified. As friends. I need time to process everything, to figure out who I am outside of this relationship. But I don't want to lose you while I do that. You won't lose me, Mary promised. I'll be here. True to her word, Mary came to the house 3 times a week, just as before. But the dynamic had shifted. They talked more, shared more. Dan told her about the accident that took his sight, a car crash that killed his younger brother and left Dan in a coma for 2 weeks. He told her about the guilt, the survivor's remorse, the way Gloria had seemed like a lifeline in those dark months of recovery. Mary shared her own stories, growing up in East Texas, struggling to make ends meet, using music as an escape from poverty and uncertainty. She told him about her father who'd left when she was 6, her mother who'd worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat, her determination to never be dependent on anyone. That's why Gloria's betrayal hit me so hard, Mary admitted during one session. She was supposed to be my friend. I thought she was someone I could trust. Finding out she was using you, using both of us, really, it made me question my judgment. Your judgment is fine, Dan assured her. Gloria fooled everyone. That's what skilled manipulators do. As weeks turned into months, Dan felt himself healing in ways that had nothing to do with his sight. He threw himself into his foundation work, expanding programs for visually impaired children to access arts education. He reconnected with old friends he'd pushed away during his relationship with Gloria. He learned to trust his instincts again. And through it all, Mary was there, not as a romantic interest, but as a genuine friend. She challenged him when he was wallowing, celebrated with him when programs succeeded, sat in comfortable silence when words felt like too much effort. 6 months after the engagement ended, Dan organized a gala for the foundation. It was the first major public event he'd attended since the breakup, and he was nervous in a way he hadn't been in years. You'll be fine, Mary assured him as they prepared backstage. She'd agreed to perform at the event, a piano piece she'd composed specifically for the foundation. What if people are staring? What if they're judging? Then they're missing out on an incredible evening because they're too busy being small-minded. Mary's hand found his, squeezing gently. Dan, you've built something beautiful here. Focus on that, not on people who don't matter. When Mary took the stage, Dan sat in the front row, listening as her fingers danced across the piano keys. The piece was haunting and hopeful, melancholic and triumphant all at once. It told a story without words, a journey from darkness to light, from pain to healing. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Dan stood, his own hands clapping until they stung, his face wet with tears he didn't bother to hide. Later, in the quiet after the event, they stood in the foundation's garden. Donors had left, staff had cleaned up, and it was just the two of them under the Texas stars. "That piece you played," Dan said softly. "What was it called?" "From Blindness to Sight." Mary's voice was tender. "It's about you. About your journey." Dan turned toward her, his heart pounding. "Mary, I need to tell you something." "Okay." 6 months ago, I asked you to wait. To give me time to heal and figure out who I was without Gloria. I've had that time now, and I know exactly who I am. He reached out, his hand finding her cheek, tracing the curve of her face with trembling fingers. I'm a man who's been given a second chance at life. A man who's learned that sight has nothing to do with seeing and everything to do with understanding. A man who's been falling in love with you since the moment you told me to stop trying to see and start trying to feel. Mary's breath hitched. Dan. I know this is complicated. I know people will judge the blind billionaire and his music therapist, just like Gloria said. I know it looks like a rebound or a rescue fantasy. But Mary, you didn't rescue me. You reminded me how to rescue myself. You showed me that I was worth more than Gloria's cruelty, that my blindness was a part of me but not all of me, that I deserved love that was honest and real. I feel the same way, Mary whispered. I felt it for so long. But I was scared that you needed time, that I should wait, that if I rushed things I'd ruin everything. I don't want to wait anymore. Dan's thumb brushed across her lips. I don't need to see you to know you're beautiful. I can hear it in your voice, feel it in your kindness, understand it in your art. Mary Johnson, you are the most beautiful person I've ever known, and I would very much like to kiss you now, if that's okay. Her answer came in the form of her lips meeting his, soft and sure and exactly right. Dan's hands cupped her face, learning the contours of her smile, the warmth of her skin, the reality of her presence. The kiss deepened, years of longing and restraint finally given permission to exist. When they pulled apart, both breathless, Mary laughed, light and joyous and free. What? Dan asked, smiling. You were right. You don't need eyes to know beauty. You're holding it. Then I'll never lose it again, Dan promised. A year later, the foundation had tripled in size, serving hundreds of visually impaired children across Texas. Dan and Mary had moved slowly, building their relationship on friendship and trust rather than rushing toward some imagined finish line. They'd faced the inevitable gossip and judgment, the whispers about opportunism and rebound relationships, with grace and united strength. On a Saturday morning in October, Dan proposed in the same garden where they'd first kissed. Mary said yes before he'd even finished asking. Their wedding was small, close friends, family, children from the foundation who performed a musical piece they'd created together. Philip stood as Dan's best man, grinning so widely his face hurt. She makes you happy, Philip said as they waited for Mary to walk down the aisle. Real happy. The kind I wasn't sure you'd ever feel. I wasn't sure either, Dan admitted. But Mary taught me something Gloria never understood, that love isn't about what you can see, it's about what you choose to believe. I choose to believe in her, in us, in the life we're building together. That's the truest sight I've ever had. The music began, piano and strings, a melody Mary had composed for this moment. Dan heard her footsteps, felt the whisper of her dress as she took his hand. Hi, she whispered, her voice thick with happy tears. Hi yourself, Dan whispered back. Ready? I've been ready since the moment you taught me that sight has nothing to do with eyes and everything to do with heart. They turned together toward the efficient, toward their future, toward a love that had been forged in betrayal and refined by truth. Dan couldn't see the tears on Mary's face or the joy in her eyes, but he could feel her hand in his, steady and certain and real. That was all the sight he needed. As they exchanged vows, promising to honor and cherish each other through all of life's darkness and light, Dan thought about the man he'd been a year ago, broken and deceived, convinced that his blindness made him less worthy of love. That man seemed like a stranger now, someone from another lifetime. Gloria had taught him what betrayal felt like. But Mary had taught him something infinitely more valuable, that the truest love requires no sight at all, only faith in what the heart knows to be real. And Dan's heart had never seen more clearly. The reception lasted into the evening, filled with music and laughter and joy. As the night wound down, Dan and Mary stood together on the terrace, listening to the sounds of their friends and family celebrating below. "Happy?" Mary asked, leaning into his embrace. Beyond words, Dan replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You? So happy I could burst." She tilted her face up, and Dan leaned down to kiss her properly, slowly, savoring the moment. When they pulled apart, Mary laughed softly. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day in the coffee shop? When you told me about Gloria?" "Which part?" "You said you'd spent 3 years thinking you were damaged goods. That you should be grateful for whatever love you could get." Her hand came up to cup his cheek. "I hope you know now that you were never damaged. You were always whole. You just needed to find someone who could see that." "I found her," Dan said simply. "And I'm never letting go." They stood there as the stars wheeled overhead, two people who'd found each other in the midst of betrayal and pain, who'd learned that true sight has nothing to do with eyes and everything to do with choosing to see the best in each other, even when the world tries to convince you otherwise. Dan had been blind for 3 years. But standing there with Mary in his arms, their future stretching out before them bright and limitless, he realized he could finally see everything that mattered. Love. Truth. Beauty. Hope. And that was the greatest sight of all. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about love, redemption, and the power of seeing with your heart. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that true love sees beyond the surface. And let us know in the comments, what does it mean to you to truly see someone? We'd love to hear your thoughts.